Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to my January wrap-up. Starting this year off with a bang, I read a lot of books this month. I am going to try to keep up with monthly wrap-ups better on my channel this year. Last year I did more bi-monthly wrap-ups or even every 3 months, and it gets overwhelming very quickly, especially when I read as many books as I did in January. So, goal for 2024 is monthly wrap-ups. The way I do wrap-ups on my channel is first I start with a whole bunch of stats from the reading month, and I'll also talk about for a couple of them how they work towards my 2024 goals that I set for myself. Then I talk about all the books that I've already featured in reading vlogs or other videos on my channel. I keep those ones quick, so if you want to see more of my in-depth thoughts and feelings about those books, you can go watch the referenced videos. And then last but not least, I go through all the books that I have not talked about yet on my channel and give my full reviews for all of them. So let's talk about January. In January, I read 20 books, or I completed 20 books, and I also DNF'd 2. Those 2 DNFs I don't include in my stats, but I do talk about them in the review portion, quickly sharing why I DNF'd them. Of the 20 books that I completed, 8 of those were already shown in videos and 12 were for other reasons. That is not a typical split for me. Usually I have way more books that are for videos, but in January I got through a whole bunch of other books too. For a genre breakdown, 9 of the books I read were contemporary/romance, and 8 of the books were mystery, thriller, horror. That is a typical split for me. Those are definitely my most read genres. And then I read 2 historical fiction books and 1 fantasy. As far as my rating breakdown, I had 0 1 stars, 3 2 stars, 6 3 stars, 9 4 stars, and 2 5-star books for an average rating of 3.5. As far as my formats that I read the books, 12 of the books are ones that I owned physically, but I read primarily via audio. That is definitely my most common way of reading books. I like to knock them off my physical TBR, but I love a good audiobook. 5 of the books I read as ebooks and I got access through NetGalley. 2 of the books I owned physically and read primarily physically, and only 1 book I listened to the audio and don't own a physical copy of. Getting into author demographics. 17 of the 20 books that I read were written by female identifying authors. 2 were by male authors and 1 was a non-binary author. And for race breakdown, 14 of the authors are white as far as I could find out, 4 are Asian and 2 were BIPOC. So that breakdown equates to 30% of the books that I read were written by non-white authors. I set a goal this year to read 40% non-white authors, so that means I have to turn that up a notch and definitely fix that for months going forward. And then as far as diverse representation inside of books, 10 of the 20 books that I read included at least 1 form of diverse representation, which is 50%, and that is right on track with the 50% goal that I set for myself for 2024. The types of diversity featured: 3 of the books had BIPOC main characters, 4 of the books featured neurodivergent main characters or talked specifically about mental health struggles. 4 of the books featured LGBTQ plus romances or main characters, and 2 of the books were translated from other languages, which I consider to be a form of diversity. So you will notice that that adds up to more than 10 books like I talked about, but that is because of intersectionality, and some of the books I read featured more than one type of diversity, which is a good thing. All right, last but not least for the stats, the publishing breakdown. 18 of the 20 books that I read this month were published by one of the big 5 publishers, meaning only 2 were independently published or by indie presses. Right now, that's not something I have a goal surrounding. I just like to track it for my own information because I think it's interesting to note which publishers the books that I'm reading are coming from. Maybe someday I'll have a goal surrounding reading more independent books, but it's definitely a trend that right now I naturally gravitate more towards traditionally published books. All right, getting into the specific books that I read in January. The first 4 books that I completed, and actually the 2 books I DNF'd, were for my January ARCs reading vlog. I will have that linked below and in the cards in case you would like to go watch that. But the books I read in that video were The Heiress by Rachel Hawkins, which is a historical mystery thriller that I rated 3 stars. Then I read Come and Get It by Kylie Reed, which is a character-driven contemporary book that I rated 2 stars. Then I read Light of the Fire by Sarah Lynn Brooke, which is another contemporary that I rated 2 stars. And then the last book that I completed for that video is Only If You're Lucky by Stacey Willingham, which is a mystery thriller that I rated 4 stars. And then the 2 books that I DNF'd in that video, which you can go watch to find out why, were 27 Minutes by Ashley Tate, which was a thriller that I was not invested in, so I DNF'd it, and then Silent Judgment by Zaire. is kind of a crime thriller that I found out really early on just wasn't for me, so I decided not to finish it. The next video that I put out in January was a book of the month reading vlog where I read 4 books. The first one is First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston, which is a new release, very buzzy mystery thriller that I really enjoyed and gave 4 stars. Then I read Check and Mate by Allie Hazelwood, which is a young adult, kind of new adult contemporary romance. I thought it was somewhere between pretty good and just okay. I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Shark Heart by Emily Haybeck, which I actually already unhauled and was purchased on my Pango bookstore. But this is a kind of a speculative contemporary book that unfortunately did not work for me, and I gave it 2 stars. And then the last book for that video was No One Can Know by Kate Ellis Marshall, another adult mystery thriller that I thought was pretty mediocre, just 3 stars. All right, now getting into the books that I have not featured in reading vlogs, I haven't talked about on my channel yet. 3 of the books that I read in January were specifically for book club discussions. So the first 2 were for an in-person book club that I participate in and help run the book discussion for. The first one we read in early January was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is a book I had seen absolutely everywhere last year. I had it on my physical TBR for a long time. I don't know why it took me this long to actually read it. I'm so glad I finally got a chance to read R.F. Kuang. I've seen amazing things about her as an author, but her previous books have all been fantasy, and fantasy is not my genre. So I was really excited when she put out a contemporary book. And this one really worked for me. This is a contemporary book, like I mentioned, about this author who is a very morally gray character. And by morally gray, I mean she's a pretty bad person. She hasn't had a lot of success in her publishing and writing life. Her first book that she published was kind of a letdown, and she was friends with this other author. And by friends, I mean acquaintances, where she was really jealous of that other author because she was having a lot of success early on in her writing career. That author dies early on in this book, and our main character decides to steal the manuscript that her friend had been working on and publish it herself. This book is very, very on the nose with the criticism it has on the publishing industry. This brought up some really, really great discussions in our in-person book club that I appreciate having. I've seen criticism that it's a little too on the nose, but I personally don't feel like that's the case. I don't think you can be too on the nose, considering that a lot of things within this book still happen all the time in terms of who gets publishing deals, discrepancies in advances, things like early reviews of books, just a lot of things that I appreciated reading also as somebody within the bookish space. I see and hear about a lot of the behind the scenes, so I liked reading it in a book and potentially communicating these issues out to a wider audience. I really enjoyed all of it. I didn't quite get 5-star feelings from it, but it's a strong 4-star from me. Then for that same book club, later in January, we decided to read Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This is another book that I've had my eye on forever. I don't know why I didn't originally pick it up because it sounds like something I would enjoy so much. So I'm glad I finally had the excuse to read it for this book club. This is a historical fiction book following our main character, who is a scientist in the 60s. We read all about her experiences trying to be a respected scientist at a time when women were not respected in STEM fields. And then we also follow her after she gets the opportunity to run a cooking show on TV, because that's all that women were trusted with being on TV for at the time. But she does it in her own way. She includes science in the cooking, and it really connects with and inspires women and mothers all around the country. So she is a very interesting main character to read from, and her story I thought was great. I am a woman who has an engineering degree. I work in a male-dominated field, so I related to a lot of what this main character goes through, but also I can appreciate the ways in which we've grown since the 60s and the ways we've stayed the same. So I definitely had a lot of connection to this book, and I thought it spurred some really great discussion in the book club. We also had women who work in different industries and from different generations. That spurred some interesting conversation. So overall, again, I really enjoyed this book. It was definitely a me type of story. So once again, I gave it 4 stars. All right, then the third book that I read for a book club this month was for an online book discussion that I got to participate in over on Gabby's channel from Gabby Reads. We read the book Bright Young Women and discussed it also with Elizabeth from Reading Riley. I will link that live show down below in case you missed it, or if you were waiting until you read the book or something. It was an amazing discussion. So I really appreciate the chance I got to be on that live show and to read and discuss this book. This is a book that is typically marketed as a mystery thriller. I would much more closely related to a historical fiction with a very serious undertone and a crime element to it, because this tells the story of the infamous sorority house murders committed by Ted Bundy, but it very specifically does not talk about Ted Bundy or mention his name. Instead, it focuses on the victims and survivors of his horrific acts and kind of reclaims the narrative and focuses on those bright young women and denounces the actions and also the spotlight that Ted Bundy got in his heyday as a serial killer, and it just has a lot to say about that whole situation. I tabbed and highlighted this book all the way up. There were so many poignant passages and quotes in this book that, again, I loved discussing in that book club live show. I think this book did a very good job of turning this into a narrative that was interesting to read, and in some cases is the story that we don't get to hear from the real life case. So it is somewhat fictionalized, but it really resonates with real life issues that we still see today. So you might see a theme in my book club reads that I do love discussing real life topics and issues through fictional books. This was the perfect version of that. So I rated the book 4 stars, but really enjoyed that entire experience I had reading this book and talking about it. So overall, amazing. All right, the next subset of books that I read in January were for a very specific purpose. I am part of my friend Gwen's Patreon, and in January she did a really fun team reading challenge that I just flew through books for. I love a reading challenge, I love reading prompts, and I used this as an opportunity to get through some books that I had on my physical TBR that I had just been putting off for no reason. So the first book that I read for this reading challenge was The Housemaid's Secret by Frida McFadden. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to remember all of the prompts that went with these books, but I know this one was for a book with red on the cover. This is the sequel to a mystery thriller called The Housemaid. This follows the same main character who is a housemaid, and she got herself into a pretty wild experience in the first book, so I was interested to read the second one to find out how it was going to basically recreate the magic of the first book without directly replicating it. And overall, I think this did a good job. Frida McFadden just writes kind of over the top, super twisty thrillers that are so fun to read. And this is no different. I do feel like it kept that twisty magic, but was different enough from the first book to feel like it was a warranted sequel. So I really don't have any complaints about it. I feel like it did what it set out to do. I rated it 4 stars. I don't think it's anything overly complex or mind-blowing, but it was a really fun read. So 4 stars from me, and I would recommend it to anyone who enjoyed that first book because I think it's a pretty good sequel. And I've actually seen some people say they like the second one even better than the first one. So if you've been hesitant for any reason, I don't think you need to be. I think it's worth a read. The next book I read for that challenge, I think, was for the prompt of a book with a heart on the cover, which might be kind of hard to see, but this one does have. It's My Mechanical Romance by Alexine Farrell Fulmuth, which, fun fact, is actually the author Olivia Blake, who wrote The Atlas Six, which is a super popular like fantasy type book. That is a pen name for this author, which I thought was interesting, but this is definitely a very different book in genre. This is a young adult contemporary book about 2 characters who are on a high school robotics team, and they strike up a very cute young adult romance. This book, okay, it's super over the top and dramatic and angsty, like a lot of young adult books that don't perfectly fit my tastes for like contemporary romance books as I am an adult, but I still have a super soft place in my heart for this book because how many books do you know of that feature high school robotics? That's definitely a subset of characters that we do not get to read from often, so I appreciate that this book is featuring that. And it makes it fun. It adds that kind of competitive element to this book and some fun settings while they're at competitions together and at practice building their robot together. It's just fun, and I wouldn't say it's the best book that I've ever read, but I would wholeheartedly recommend this to young adult readers who are looking for these type of characters to relate to. I'm really glad that it exists. I rated it 4 stars. Like I said, STEM person, so I always appreciate a STEM contemporary book. I liked it, and I'm glad it exists. Alrighty, the next book I read for the challenge, I can't 100% remember the prompt that I read this for, maybe BIPOC author, but it's Chaos Theory by Nick Stone. I've read a couple of other books by this author and really enjoyed them. This, once again, is no different. This is a young adult contemporary book about these 2 characters who are both really struggling with some serious mental health issues. They start up a texting relationship with each other that kind of starts out as like a mistaken identity type situation, but that eventually forms into a true friendship and relationship between these two as they help each other work through their issues. This one is pretty dark and gritty. There are definitely content warnings in here, which I'm reading from the book include mentions of self-harm and suicide, but there's also an author's note at the beginning from Nick Stone saying that these mental health issues that she includes in this book are deeply personal to her, and so she hopes that they connect through the page to anybody else who is struggling with them or knows somebody who's struggling with them, and hopes that this book can help explain those issues and make them feel not so isolating. So all in all, I'm sure you can guess, I appreciate all of that. I appreciate that this book exists for those people who need it. I, once again, didn't super deeply connect with this book myself, but I can't denounce the importance of a book like this. I appreciate Nick Stone for writing it and being so open and honest with the story and with her intention with the story. So otherwise, no bad things to say. I gave it 4 stars, and I will definitely continue to pick up Nick Stone's books. She also wrote Dear Martin and Dear Justice, which are 2 pretty popular young adult contemporary books. I've read them both. I loved them. So solid 4 stars, and I'm really glad I've been working through kind of my young adult backlist. All right, shifting gears a little bit, the next book that I read is Days at the Murasaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagasawa and translated by Eric Ozawa. This is a book translated from Japanese. It's set in Japan, and it's a very slow, character-driven book about this bookshop in Japan. Basically, this 25-year-old woman is struggling in her life, and she gets the opportunity to go stay with her uncle who owns this bookshop. She ends up living at the bookshop and helping him run it. And the first half is really about that, about the day-to-day of being at this bookshop and how she kind of starts to heal herself through that experience with her uncle. The second half of this book takes a little bit of a turn when one of her family members starts to go through some pretty serious medical issues. I did enjoy the first part of this book more than the second part, which is kind of strange because usually I don't like slow, mundane types of books. Usually I gravitate towards more of the hard-hitting stuff, but there was something just so cozy about this little bookshop and about her experience day in, day out, getting herself up, ready to work when she's been struggling so much before this. I appreciated it, I liked it, and I didn't really want it to change for the second half. So overall, I'm giving it 3 stars. It was a super short and quick read. Interestingly, this book is getting a sequel later this year, and I definitely think I will check that out. We'll see how it goes. I also think this was a really beautiful cover. It's gonna be hard to show on camera, but like the letters and some of the books in here are like a metallic finish, which I think is so pretty. So I will definitely be keeping this book on my bookshelves for a long time because I think it's beautiful. All right, we are slowly but surely making our way through these books. The next book that I read is The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose. This is the sequel to The Maid, which was a super popular mystery last year, and I'm not sure why I haven't seen really any buzz about this sequel, but it follows the same main character, Molly the maid, who works at a hotel and finds herself in the middle of a murder mystery. This one, similarly to The Housemaid's Secret, I was curious how it was going to keep the same storyline going without directly replicating the first mystery. And once again, I was impressed with this one because I think it did a good job. There is, once again, nothing overly mind-blowing about this book. It does fall, I think, a little bit more into the cozy mystery genre, but it was still entertaining to read. I appreciated and enjoyed reading from Molly as a main character. I like that she thinks differently, and because of that is an asset to the solving of the mystery. And once again, if you weren't sure about picking up the sequel after enjoying the first book, I think it does a good job being not too similar but not too different from the first book, so that anyone who enjoyed that first one will also enjoy the second one, and I gave it 4 stars. All right, the next book that I read, I'm really losing track of what all the prompts were, but it's Something Wild and Wonderful by Anita Kelly. This is a non-binary author who writes LGBTQ romance books. This is between 2 men who are separately hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and they basically continually meet on this trail. They eventually end up hiking together, and it's about their shared experience doing this long hike and doing some internal soul searching and self-healing. They're both on the trail for different reasons, and they kind of have to work through different sets of issues. I always enjoy a book that features 2 characters working through their own issues by themselves as well as together. I feel like that's powerful, and I feel like this book did that well. I also, for some reason, enjoy romances set outdoors. There's something about the outdoor atmosphere that just brings a lot to a romance book. Maybe it's that they're also having to navigate external forces and external conflicts when they're in an uncomfortable situation. I don't know. I'm not really an outdoorsy person, but I still absolutely loved this book. I rated it 5 stars. I have nothing bad to say about it. Both of these characters are so lovable, and they're very distinct in their personalities, and I think they complement each other very well, even though they're not complete opposites. It was just such a heartwarming read. This is my first 5-star book of 2024, and I'm so glad that it is. I would definitely recommend it, and I'm looking forward to not only reading more of this author's backlist, they have at least one other book that I haven't read, but also they have a new book coming out in 2024 that I will be reading as soon as I can. All right, the next book that I read is another translated book, Love in the Big City by Sang-Young Park. This is set in Korea and was originally written in Korean, and it looks like it was translated by Anton Her. This is about a main character who lives in Seoul, South Korea, and is gay and is navigating his life. We see him go through many romantic and sexual partners and go through a lot as a human being. This book gets pretty dark and dire, so definitely content warnings, look them up if you need them, but it's a pretty powerful book by the end of it. It's been nominated for awards. I think it has a lot to say, so I'm glad I read it. I gave it 3 stars. The specifics of the plot have already kind of escaped me. It's not the type of book that I think about often in my day-to-day or look back on the reading experience particularly fondly, but again, I respect what it did, and I would definitely recommend it if the subject matter sounds interesting to you. Maybe you're looking to read more translated books in the new year. I'm glad I read it, and solid 3 stars. All right, last but not least, the last physical book that I read this year. I believe I read this one for a book with greenery on the cover maybe, but it's Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail by Ashley Herring Blake. This is a female-female romance about one woman who is a designer and like a project planner, and one woman who is a carpenter, and they end up working together on this project that is on this TV show. They initially start off on the wrong foot, kind of conflicting because they have different visions for the space and also different relationships with the space, but eventually their chemistry and connection is undeniable, so they strike up a relationship. I enjoyed this book. I didn't love it quite as much as the first book in this series, which is Delilah Green Doesn't Care. For some reason, that one definitely resonated with me a little bit more, but I still had a fun time reading this book, and I recently acquired the 3rd book in the series. Thanks to my friend Summer, I actually think she sent me this one and that one, so she's definitely enabling my reading of the entire series, but definitely excited to read that 3rd one and get the conclusion to the trilogy. All right, and then the very last book I have to talk about in this video has not been featured in a reading vlog yet, but that's because it's the first book in a reading vlog that I will be putting out in February. It's my February arcs, and the first book I read for that video is The Women by Chris and Hannah. And normally I would probably say you're gonna have to wait for that video for my full review, but I don't know if I can rave about this book enough. So I'm gonna talk about it here, and it's gonna be a spoiler for that vlog, so sorry. But Chris and Hannah, one of my favorite authors. I've really enjoyed her most recent historical fiction books that she's read. This is another historical fiction book by her about a woman who decides to be an army nurse in the Vietnam War. And my God, this woman goes through so much. And this entire book is just a huge ode to the women of the Vietnam War, who are often left out of the narrative, not remembered as being involved, and were treated really horribly after the fact of the war. This book, obviously called The Women, is about those women. I so appreciate this book for having that purpose. I definitely think it's important, and I think this will hit and resonate a lot of people to hopefully give some recognition and respect towards those women. But also just the story of the main character in this book is so emotional. This book took me like 2 weeks to read, which is so unlike me, but I'm so glad that I read it so slowly because I feel like I just digested every single thing that happened to her. I was able to feel it more deeply when I gave myself breaks to absorb what I just read, because it's a lot. There are some moments of this book that are really hard to read. So again, content warnings, look into them if you're going to pick up this book, but I really loved it. I came out of it so emotionally exhausted in the absolute best way. I cannot wait for this book to come out in February to see other people's responses to it. I don't think anybody really needs me to shout out Kristen Hanna as an author. She's wildly popular already. I'm sure this book will be a bestseller, but if you're a fan of wartime historical fiction as a general genre, then this is a must-read book. Make sure it's high on your list and then message me after you finish it because we've got a lot to talk about. But yeah, overwhelming 5 stars. Definitely my favorite book that I've read so far this year, which might not be saying a lot, but also I finished 20 books. So that's definitely not a bad thing. So with that, that is all the books that I read in January. Let me know if you have also read any of the books that I talked about. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Did I convince you to add any of these books to your TBR or maybe take them off if I didn't enjoy them? Let me know. I would love to hear. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video and I will see you in my next one.